Las Vegas was glowing that night. Neon lights flickered like restless stars, music drifted through warm desert air, and the strip pulsed with money, laughter, and champagne dreams. And inside the most glamorous restaurant in town, every table was filled, every single one. But the man who filled them was not allowed to sit in one. Dean Martin stood near the entrance, adjusting his cufflinks, watching the crowd through the glass doors. His name alone had packed the place. Wealthy businessmen, actresses, tourists, casino regulars, all there because he said one simple sentence. "Tonight, we dine here," and they came. Dean had always been easygoing, smooth voice, smooth smile, smooth life. But tonight, something didn't sit right. Because earlier that afternoon, he had received a quiet phone call. The kind of call that doesn't shout but stings. It came from his friend. Louis Armstrong was already in town. His trumpet had made the world dance. His laugh could fill a room before the music even began. When he played, even the most stubborn heart softened. But in Las Vegas, there were rules. Ugly rules. Rules that didn't make sense to decent men. The restaurant Dean had just filled wouldn't let Louis eat there. Not through the front door, not at a table, not in the open. They would serve him in the kitchen, like a secret. It's like a shame. Dean hadn't said anything when he first heard it. It'd just gone quiet, very quiet. And when Dean Martin went quiet, it meant he was thinking. The owner of the restaurant greeted him with a bright smile. "Dean, my friend, look at this crowd. We've never seen business like this." Dean smiled back. "Yeah," he said calmly. "Funny how that works." The owner laughed nervously. Everything was perfect on the surface. Crystal glasses clinked. Jazz music floated through the air. Waiters rushed back and forth like trained dancers. But Dean's eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. He was waiting, because he had invited someone, and he had not told the owner. Outside, a black car pulled up. The driver stepped out first, then Louis Armstrong followed. Sharp suit, polished shoes, trumpet case in hand. He looked around at the bright restaurant sign, the place his friend had personally invited him to. He knew the policy. He had lived with policies like this his whole life. But Dean had said, "Come," so he came. Inside, conversations continued, until the doors opened, and Louis stepped in. Silence didn't fall instantly. It rolled slowly like a wave. Heads turned. Some faces lit up in recognition. Some stiffened. The owner's smile vanished. He rushed forward quickly, lowering his voice. "Mr. Armstrong," he said carefully, we weren't informed you'd be dining tonight." Louis gave a polite smile. He had mastered that smile years ago. "Duh, I was invited." The owner swallowed. "Yes. Well, perhaps we can prepare something comfortable in the back." The back, always the back. Before Louis could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Back. It was calm. Dangerously calm. Dean Martin stepped forward. "You mean the kitchen?" Dean asked. The owner forced a laugh. "Just a private arrangement. You understand how things are?" Dean didn't blink. "No," he said softly. "I don't." The music had stopped. No one noticed when. Louis looked at Dean almost as if to say, "Let it go." He had endured worse. But something in Dean had shifted. This wasn't about publicity. This wasn't about politics. This was about respect. About a man whose music filled rooms across the world, while being told he couldn't sit in one. Dean turned slowly to face the dining room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. Conversations froze. "Quick question," he continued casually. "Who here came tonight because I recommended this place?" Nearly every hand went up. Laughter. Cheers. Dean nodded. "Good, then I suppose you'll understand this." He stepped beside Louis. "My friend here is the greatest musician in this room, possibly in this city, maybe in the country." A few claps started. "If he eats in the kitchen," Dean continued, voice steady, "then so do I." The room went completely still. The owner's face turned pale. "Dean, let's not be dramatic." "Oh, I'm not," Dean said gently. "In fact, I'm being very practical." He looked around again. "And if I'm in the kitchen, I assume many of you will be joining me?" There was a moment of hesitation. Then a chair scraped, then another. One table stood up, then another. Then seconds, half the restaurant was on its feet. The owner's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Louis stared at Dean. He hadn't asked for this. He'd never asked for fights. He fought with music. But here was his friend, risking contracts, risking casino relationships, risking reputation, for one simple thing: a seat at a table. The owner panicked. "Wait," he said quickly. "There's no need for that. Of course, Mr. Armstrong can sit wherever he likes." Dean tilted his head. "Wherever." "Yes, of course." Dean didn't move. He waited. The owner turned toward the hostess. "Prepare the best table in the house." And this time, it wasn't the back. The room slowly breathed again. Music resumed. But something had changed. Something deeper than dinner. Louis was seated at the center of the restaurant. For the first time in that building's history, no one told him to move. But the night wasn't over, because in Las Vegas, powerful men watched everything, and word was already spreading. Dean Martin just challenged the rules. Some admired him, some were furious, some were planning a response. As Louis lifted his trumpet later that evening and played a soft melody just for the room, something beautiful happened. The crowd didn't just hear music. No, they heard courage. They heard dignity. They heard what happens when one man decides that comfort is less important than character. Dean watched from across the table. He didn't look heroic. He looked relieved, because sometimes doing the right thing isn't loud, it's just necessary. But outside, in a quiet office upstairs, casino executive crushed his cigarette in an ashtray. "This," he muttered, "will cost him." And maybe it would, because in a city built on power and silence, breaking the rules came with consequences. Dean didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, his friend was not in the kitchen, and that was enough. The applause from that night did not echo for long. By morning, Las Vegas had already started whispering. In private offices above casino floors, men in tailored suits leaned back in leather chairs and replayed the story with tight expressions. It was not the music they discussed. It was not the dinner. It was the moment Dean Martin had forced a room to choose. And the room had chosen him. That was the real problem. Dean woke up late the next afternoon in his hotel suite. The desert sun filtered through heavy curtains, thin lines of gold stretching across the carpet. For a moment, everything felt normal. Another show tonight, another crowd, another round of applause. Then the phone rang. His manager did not waste time. "Dean, we've got a situation." There is a certain tone in a man's voice that tells you the bill has arrived. Dean had heard it before. "What kind of situation?" he asked calmly. "Casino executives are upset. Sponsors too. They say you embarrassed a respected establishment. They're calling it disruptive." Dean let out a quiet breath. Disruptive. A polite word for inconvenient. "They're reviewing your performance contract," his manager continued. "Tonight's show may be postponed." Postponed meant something else in Vegas. It meant replaced. Dean walked toward the window and pulled the curtain aside. The strip glittered below him, indifferent and bright. It had always seemed untouchable, like a machine that ran on money and obedience. Last night, he had pressed against its gears. "Did I break a rule?" Dean asked slowly. "Or did I break a habit?" There was silence on the other end. "That's not how they see it," his manager replied. By late afternoon, another call came. The radio sponsor was reconsidering an upcoming broadcast appearance. A hotel manager hinted that future bookings might need reevaluation. The language was careful, almost gentle, but the message was sharp. "Stay in line." Dean poured himself a drink and sat down, not to escape the pressure, but to think through it. He had never considered himself a crusader. He sang, he entertained, he made people forget their problems for an hour. But last night, he had refused to forget someone else's. There was a knock at the door. It was Louis. He stepped inside with that familiar warmth in his eyes, but there was something heavier behind it. "You didn't have to do that," Louis said quietly. Dean smiled. "Yes, I did." Louis shook his head. "You've got contracts. Shows people depending on you. I've handled worse." "That's exactly the problem," Dean replied. "You shouldn't have to handle it." They stood in silence for a moment. Two artists in a city that profited from their talent but resisted their equality. "I don't want you paying for my dinner," Louis said gently. Dean looked at him, steady and certain. "I'm not paying for dinner. I'm paying for my own peace." That evening, confirmation arrived. The casino would allow the show to go on, but there were conditions. A public statement clarifying that the incident was misunderstood. No further political gestures. Focus on entertainment. Dean read the statement they wanted him to sign. It was polished, harmless on the surface. It smoothed everything over. It also erased the truth. He folded the paper slowly. Downstairs, workers prepared the stage. The lights were tested. The band tuned their instruments. Outside, people lined up unaware of the negotiations happening above them. Dean had a choice. He could sign the statement, keep the peace, protect the contracts. Or he could refuse and risk becoming difficult in a city that did not tolerate difficulty. An hour before curtain time, his manager returned. "They're waiting," he said. "If you don't sign, they may cancel midweek, maybe longer." Dean buttoned his jacket and adjusted his tie. "I won't insult the audience," he replied. "You'll lose money." "Money comes back," Dean said. "Character doesn't." When he walked onto the stage that night, the applause was louder than usual. Perhaps word had spread. Perhaps the crowd sensed tension in the air. He sang, as he always did, smooth and effortless. But near the end of the show, he paused. "I've been told," he began carefully, "that last night was a misunderstanding. I just want to clear that up." The room grew still. It wasn't. No anger, no shouting, just honesty. "If my friend can't sit at a table, I don't need the table either." For a second there was silence. Then someone clapped, then another. The applause rolled through the room like thunder. Upstairs, executives listened through a closed-circuit monitor, their expressions unreadable. Dean finished his set without another word about it. He bowed, left the stage, and walked back into the quiet hallway behind the curtain. His manager approached slowly. "They're furious," he said. Dean nodded. But the show sold out tomorrow. Outside, reporters had begun to gather. Questions were forming. Headlines were being drafted. Vegas had tried to correct him quietly. Instead, the story had grown louder. Louis waited backstage. "You sure about this?" he asked. Dean smiled, tired but steady. "Sometimes the right note costs more," he said. "But you play it anyway." The Strip still glittered that night. The casino still hummed with noise and profit, but something had shifted, not in the policies yet, not in the contracts, in the crowd. People had seen a man choose principle over comfort. And in a city built on spectacle, that was the most unexpected performance of all. The headlines came faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, newspapers across Nevada carried variations of the same story. Some praised Dean Martin for taking a stand. Others called him reckless. Few suggested he was stirring trouble where none was needed. In Las Vegas, image was everything. And now his image was being debated at breakfast tables and in executive offices. At the casino boardroom, the atmosphere was colder than usual. Contracts were placed on polished wood tables. Revenue charts were reviewed. One executive pointed to numbers projected on the wall. "Ticket sales are up," he admitted. Another leaned forward, "Short term, but sponsors are nervous." "We can't afford unpredictability." Dean's name lingered in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, Dean sat quietly in his dressing room before that evening's performance. The laughter he usually carried seemed softer now. It's not gone, just thoughtful. He understood the machine he was pushing against. Vegas rewarded loyalty and punished disruption. He had been one of its brightest stars. Now he was testing its tolerance. His manager stepped inside again, closing the door carefully. "They're considering rotating your performance slot," he said. "Later hours, less promotion, quiet pressure." Dean nodded slowly. He had expected that. In this town, you were not attacked loudly. You were slowly turned down, like a dimmer switch on a chandelier. "Let them," he replied. "But pressure has weight, even on strong shoulders." Phone calls from colleagues became cautious. A few advised him to smooth things over. One fellow entertainer spoke bluntly. "You're not going to change the system overnight. Why risk everything?" Dean had no dramatic answer. He wasn't trying to lead a revolution. He simply could not pretend nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, Louis visited again. He brought no trumpet this time, just himself. "They're watching you closely," Louis said quietly. "I know. I've seen this before," Louis continued. "Sometimes they smile in public and close doors in private." Dean leaned back in his chair. "You regret coming that night?" Louis paused. "No," he said firmly. "I regret that you had to fight for something that should have been simple." They sat in silence, the kind shared by men who understand more than they say. Outside, word had spread beyond Las Vegas. Letters began arriving at the hotel. Some handwritten, some typed. Strangers thanking him. Veterans, young musicians, families who had watched from a distance and felt seen. Not all letters were kind. A few warned him to stay in his place. Few promised consequences. But something was shifting. That night, as Dean stepped onto the stage again, he sensed it immediately. The energy was different, not tense, focused. He performed as always, smooth and effortless. But he noticed something else. Louis Armstrong was seated openly in the audience, not hidden, not backstage, at a table in full view. The casino management had allowed it, perhaps hoping the controversy would fade, or perhaps recognizing that removing him now would create a storm. Dean's eyes met Louis's briefly. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Midway through the show, Dean invited Louis onto the stage. There was a brief hesitation from the band. Then applause erupted as Louis joined him. No speeches. No political declarations. Just music. Louis lifted his trumpet and played a slow, soulful melody that filled every corner of the room. The notes were steady, rich, impossible to ignore. Conversation stopped. Even waiters froze mid-step. It was not protest. It was presence. Presence is powerful. Upstairs, executives watched again. Performance was flawless. The crowd was captivated. Revenue reports would show another sold-out night. But something else had been sold that evening, an idea that maybe talent could not be separated from dignity. After the show, reporters crowded the exit. Cameras flashed. "Are you making a statement?" one asked. Dean shook his head calmly. "No," he said, "just sharing a stage with a friend." The simplicity of the answer disarmed them. Back in the quiet of his suite, the consequences were still uncertain. Contracts could still shift, bookings could still disappear. But one thing had become clear. The lights had not dimmed him. If anything, they had revealed him. And in a city that thrived on illusion, authenticity was the rarest act of all. Pressure does not always explode. Sometimes it fades. Not because the powerful surrender easily, but because the ground beneath them begins to move. Out. In the weeks that followed, something unusual happened in Las Vegas. The expected punishment never fully arrived. There were delays. There were tense meetings. A few sponsors quietly stepped back, but the crowds did not. If anything, they grew. People who had never cared about backstage politics suddenly cared about where they spent their money. Letters kept arriving. Journalists kept calling. Other performers began asking careful questions about policies that had long been accepted without discussion. Casino executives faced a calculation they understood very well. Empty tables cost more than pride. One afternoon, Dean was called into a private meeting with senior management. The room was formal, almost ceremonial, thick carpet, heavy curtains, neutral expressions. A senior executive cleared his throat. "Mr. Martin, we value your contribution to this establishment." Dean nodded politely. "There has been tension," the man continued. "We prefer stability. But we also recognize that public perception matters." It was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was a shift. Another executive spoke more plainly. "If certain policies are adjusted, we expect discretion in return." Dean studied them carefully. He had not demanded headlines. He had not organized boycotts. He had simply refused to step aside. "What kind of adjustment?" he asked. The answer came measured and deliberate. "All contracted performers will have equal access to dining and public areas within our properties." The sentence was clinical. Its impact was not. Dean did not smile. He did not celebrate, simply nodded once. "That sounds reasonable," he replied. When he left the room, he walked slowly through the casino floor. The machines rang. The cards shuffled. Spectacle continued as always. But upstairs, something old had quietly been rewritten. That evening's performance carried a different energy. Not defiance, not tension. Relief. Louis attended again, not as a statement, but as a guest, like anyone else. He was greeted at the front door without hesitation. No whispers, no redirected paths. Inside the restaurant that had once refused him, he was shown to a table near the center. No kitchen, no back entrance, just a seat. Dean joined him briefly before the show. "He didn't make an announcement," Louis said softly. "They never do," Dean replied. Louis looked around the room. You think this lasts? Dean considered the question. It lasts as long as people remember why it matters. Later on stage, Dean did not mention policies or meetings, did not recount victories, he sang. He joked. He moved through the evening with his familiar ease. Near the end of the set, he paused and looked toward the audience. We're lucky, he said casually. We get to share rooms like this. Music sounds better when everyone can hear it from the same place. It was the only reference he made. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. In the months that followed, other establishments quietly adjusted their rules. Some did it out of conviction, some out of competition. The details were not always pure, but the doors opened wider. Dean never claimed credit publicly. He never framed himself as a hero. When asked about the incident years later, he reduced it to something simple. A friend deserved dinner, he would say. Yet those who were there understood it was more than that. It was about the quiet power of refusal. The refusal to normalize what should never have been normal. The refusal to protect comfort at the expense of dignity. Louis continued to perform in Las Vegas, not hidden, not tolerated. Welcomed. The city did not transform overnight. Prejudice does not vanish because of one decision. But a crack had formed in a wall that once seemed permanent, and cracks let light in. On his final night of that season, Dean stood alone on the stage after the curtain call. The audience had begun to thin. The band packed their instruments. He looked out at the emptying room. Tables that once had limits. Chairs that once carried conditions. Now, simply furniture. He adjusted his tie, stepped down from the stage, and walked through the dining room one last time. No one stopped him. No one stopped anyone. Sometimes history does not announce itself. It happens in a single choice, a single sentence, a single seat at a table. And in that choice, something larger than a career is preserved: character.